Welcome to the Natural Allergy Treatment Podcast. I'm your host, Jess, and joining me from Auckland, New Zealand today is our PAT Expert Naturopath Jenny. Hi, Jenny.
Hey, Jess.
We're part of Health and Wellness Australia and Auckland, who are a team of naturopaths around Australia and New Zealand that specialise in a natural allergy treatment called Positive Association Technique, or PAT. So today we're going to be talking about the somewhat controversial topic of anti-nutrients, which are the basis of a few of the modern fad diets gaining popularity lately. And we're also seeing more clients in our clinics requesting treatments for some of these anti-nutrients, particularly for oxalates. So today Jenny's going to take us through both sides of this debate and what the average person should consider before changing their diet.
Yeah, so these food fads are an interesting thing because they're generally something that's considered healthy, like green smoothies or fermented vegetables. And so therefore, you'd think that they're good for you. But if we all have different genes, what's healthy for you isn't necessarily healthy for another person. So some food chemicals have now been given this title anti-nutrients. And depending on which research paper you read, they're either to be avoided or to be heartily included into each meal. So it is very polarizing. So it's generally a diet of unprocessed whole foods will improve your health. But for some individuals, overeating these certain types of foods can cause problems. And that's because the plants themselves, they need to survive to grow and thrive. And so they've created substances that protect them from predators, which are not always beneficial to us. So sensitive people can also develop reactions to these anti-nutrients, which trigger a myriad of symptoms from gut problems, itching skin, headaches, fatigue, and eating all of these things, all in the belief that these are healthy for us. So they must be good for us, but they're not always good for us if you have a reaction to them.
Yeah, so let's get into it. What are anti-nutrients exactly?
So anti-nutrients are compounds that are found in plants that are part of their chemical defense mechanism that helps them to repel predators, along with other things like external protection, like spiky leaves or hard shells. So they affect us in two ways. They can either bind to the micronutrients in the plant, which stops you being able to absorb them in your body, or they inhibit digestive enzymes from working so you can't break down the food properly. So for an example, oxalates will bind to calcium and prevent it from being absorbed by the body, whereas too many tannins can inactivate the enzymes in our gut that break down and absorb proteins. And in some people also, anti-nutrients can cause inflammation in the digestive tract, which can cause systemic inflammation over time, which is obviously not a good thing.
Yeah, so what are some of the common types of anti-nutrients?
So gluten, phytates, tannins, lectins, and oxalates are the most common ones. And some people are more sensitive to anti-nutrients than others, and gluten's the most common one that people react to. Recent research has found that it can affect up to 20% of the Western population. But interestingly, not all gluten sensitivities are related to gluten being an anti-nutrient, because we actually can't break down gluten in the gut. So this causes inflammation, which is and that which leads to lots of other problems, and that's different from other anti-nutrients like lectins or oxalates, which they block or impair our ability to digest nutrients. So gluten is such a massive topic. We're going to do that next blog and podcast just because it's too big to sort of talk about in this one. And so that's one to, if you're interested in gluten's and celiac and gluten intolerance and things like that. We'll do that next time.
Mm-hmm.
So other people may be more sensitive to anti-nutrients as they are eating higher amounts in their diets. Because they're all plant-based, vegetarians and vegans will therefore be eating more of them and could be reacting because of that.
Yeah, so let's do a bit of a breakdown of the different types of anti-nutrients, how they can affect your body and how we can help minimize the effects of them. So could you start off with oxalates?
Yeah, sure. So oxalates are also called oxalic acid, and they're a compound created in our bodies and by plants as a waste product of vitamin C metabolism. And our bodies can produce oxalate on its own or obtain it from food. and vitamin C can also be converted into oxalate when it's metabolized. So most people's bodies will naturally release the oxalates, but consuming high amounts can affect our body's ability to process them, and some people can't break them down as well as other people. So high oxalates in the body, which is called hypoxaluria, can be a factor in many chronic conditions. So you've got digestion and urinary issues, autoimmune disorders, neurological conditions. They affect the mitochondrial functioning, so in your cells. So that can cause fatigue and muscle soreness, as well as creating inflammation. And unnecessary oxidation stress and free radicals can happen from too much oxalate. So that can affect every system in the body. And there's some a specific symptom that some people find they have, and it's a feeling when you wake up in the morning and you stand up, like feeling like you're walking on shards of glass. And that's because the oxalates present in our body as little sharp crystals or crystalline structures that have jagged edges that can cause pain, irritation, or stress. So if you have that kind of thing, that potentially is a symptom of this oxalates. So when the oxalates bind with minerals in the digestive tract, they can accumulate as these harmful crystals in the body. So they're associated a lot with diseases where the crystals gather. So in the bone, the myocardium, your blood vessels, and your skin. So kidney stones is one of the most common examples that people may be have associated with oxalates. So when oxalates bind to calcium in the kidneys, they form calcium oxalate kidney stones. And so for most people, these compounds are removed in the urine and they don't cause a problem. But for some people, they accumulate. And interestingly, those urinary oxalates, they can be formed naturally as a waste product from the body, or you can get it from dietary sources. Oxalates can also impair the healing of injured tissues and joints, and this is where this whole joint pain can come into it. So with joint and muscle pain, the oxalates generally will form in the body where there has been a weakness. So for example, if you've injured your hip, you may find that that area becomes more painful when you eat high oxalate foods. Candida overgrowth has also been associated with high oxalates because the candida produces oxalates as a byproduct of its metabolism. And people who have had gastric bypass surgery or other surgeries that affect the way their digestive system works can also have high oxalate levels in their urine because they're not being able to process it properly. There's also genetic differences and nutritional deficiencies which can impact your ability to process the oxalates. So a really important one is the B vitamin deficiencies, and especially B6 and B1 can result in you having high oxalates in your body. And this is a really common deficiency, especially if you have a really stressful life, having like a low vitamin B. So it is one to look out for. Also with leaky gut syndrome, the health of the gut microbe and fat absorption can influence whether or not you have an issue with the oxalates. So the mineral deficiencies can cause high oxalates as there's insufficient minerals in the gut to bind with the oxalates. So if if your gut's not working properly, then it's not able to process out or absorb these minerals. So can cause this accumulation. And the thing about high oxalates is that it can actually show up in a lot of chronic conditions. So you've got asthma, autism, allergies, eczema, ADHD, autoimmune thyroid, chronic fatigue, depression, anxiety, cystic fibrosis, fibromyalgia, inflammatory bowel disease, cystitis, low muscle tone, even migraine, headaches, depression, anxiety. Like it shows up in a lot of diseases and chronic conditions, just because can affect such a big part of the body.
Yeah, it sounds like it can be an underlying factor when it comes to basically any of these kind of chronic conditions. So it's something to consider there, definitely. Yeah. And so when it comes to foods that are high in oxalates, what kind of foods are they present in?
Yeah, so they're found in green leafy vegetables. The highest concentration is in spinach, silver beet, and rhubarb, but they're also high in soy products, nuts, especially almonds, sesame seeds, potatoes, especially the skin, beans, legumes, raspberries, kiwi fruit, chocolate, and dates. And interestingly, in Britain, the highest proportion of oxalates is actually found in the diet was from tea.
Oh,
So,
wow.
yeah,
Yeah.
so high. So tea is really high in oxalates. Yeah.
Yep. So you can also contact us via our website. We'll put all the links there in our show notes, but we can send through a full list of oxalates if you are curious to find out how widespread they are in a wide range of different foods. But when it comes to they're in so many different foods, it's basically impossible to avoid these kind of things. So how can we help minimize the negative effects of over consuming oxalates?
Yeah, so some of the oxalates can be broken down in the gut before they bind to the calcium or the iron and the zinc by gut bacteria. So there's a specific gut bacteria called, I'm not probably going to say it probably, Oxalobacter formigeus. It'll be in the notes if you need a specific, need to know how to spell it. And it actually uses oxalate as an energy source. So it's obviously really good at breaking it down, but not everyone has this type of bacteria in the gut anymore, especially if you've had repeated antibiotic use. So the amount of oxalates the body absorbs may depend on the composition of your gut microbiome, but also boiling or soaking foods high in oxalate will reduce this oxalate content. Also, supplementation of calcium may help as well, as the calcium binds to the oxalate in your gut, so it helps to reduce the amount that you actually absorb.
Yeah, and it's actually interesting that you mentioned the antibiotic use, because we actually did a post on our socials just last week and found that I think it's around 30 to 40% of people are doing at least one course of antibiotics a year. So it's safe to assume that we do all have some kind of compromised gut microbiome when it comes to these things, because that can definitely play into these kind of issues as well. So moving on to the next one, what are lectins?
Right. So lectins are naturally occurring proteins that are found in most plants. They serve as a protective function for plants as they grow. So they don't actually have any nutritional value when they're consumed in foods. And they're a carbohydrate binding protein. So the most familiar one to that would be gluten. So lectins can damage the lining of the gastrointestinal tract, which causes the gut to become inflamed and not functioning as well. So the normally tight junctions in the intestinal wall can widen, which allows various undigested food particles and toxins and bacteria to kind of pass through into our bloodstream. So this is basically what leaky gut is, or another word for it is intestinal permeability. But it can also interfere with the absorption of minerals, especially calcium, iron, phosphorus, and zinc.
Yeah, so leaky gut's a really another common one that's linked with a lot of clients that we see at our clinic, because it is kind of a precursor to developing a lot of allergies and sensitivities, and having these kind of reactions can also play into that leaky gut as well. So that's very relevant there.
Yeah.
But are there some people who are more susceptible to the effects of lectins?
Yeah, so some people are more sensitive to lectins than others, especially if they already have a bowel disorder like Crohn's or celiac disease. So in these people, even small amounts of lectins can generate like an immune-related symptoms like intestinal inflammation, joint pain or skin flare-ups. And also, if a person has enzymes that don't function correctly, consuming excess lectins may lead to nutrient deficiencies and digestive problems. And this is because the body can't break down the lectins. Instead, they bind to nutrients and cells lining the GIT or the gastrointestinal system.
Is that why lectins is often recommended to be avoided by people who have autoimmune issues?
Yeah, so lectin proteins bind to cells for a long period of time, so they can potentially cause an autoimmune response. And so they play a role in inflammatory conditions like rheumatoid arthritis and type 1 diabetes. They also can alter the body's hormonal balance because they mimic proteins in your thyroid, so it can trick your body into attacking your thyroid gland. So, yeah, and they also can block mucosa, which is the natural barrier and protector against bacteria and viruses in the intestine and the throat. So this can create a prolonged state of inflammation, which can also lead to an autoimmune condition.
Yeah, so lectins are in a lot of foods as well. Which kind of foods are they highest in?
So you've got all your legumes, so your beans, lentils, peas, soybeans, peanuts, your whole grains, wheat, quinoa, barley, buckwheat, corn, millet, oats, and rice. So, all the grains and legumes. The nightshades, so your tomatoes, peppers, potatoes, and eggplant. You've got squash, peanuts, cashews, almonds, A1 milk, but not A2 milk. So A2 milk, the protein is different, and somehow it changes it. And meat raised conventionally can contain lectins because so they're fed. The grains are fed to the livestock, so therefore it's in their meat, in their body. But if they are grass fed, then that generally doesn't happen. And some fruit will also have it.
Yep. And there are actually a few different ways that you can prepare food to help reduce the lectins. So would you mind taking us through a few of those different methods?
Sure. So those fruits and vegetables that I mentioned before, if you peel and de-seed them, that helps to reduce the lectins, but also sprouting, soaking, and fermentation is good ways of reducing it. So if you want to sprout your seeds or grains or legumes, you put them in a container and you cover them for with a couple of centimeters of water over the top, and then you cover it with a cheesecloth or a wire mesh, and you leave it to soak overnight, and then you rinse it really thoroughly because a lot of the lectins are released in that water. And then you put it back in a clean container, and you continue to kind of rinse and drain at least twice a day for the next couple of days. And then once this little sprout or like a tail pokes out, you just give it a final rinse, and then you can eat it. And then that has reduced the lectin amount a lot, and it's also a great way to release a lot of other nutrients as well. So it is a really good way to get the most out of seeds and grains and legumes. And because the lectins are mostly found on the seed coat, when you add water, the seed will germinate, and then that coat gets metabolized along with the lectins. So the longer the sprout, the longer the lectins are deactivated, unless it's alfalfa sprouts, because they actually, when they're sprouted, they enhance lectins. So you need to avoid those if you do have a problem with them. And white rice is actually better than brown rice. They're both not great, but if you were out somewhere and you needed to pick, the brown rice has lectins in the hull, whereas white rice, the hull's been removed, and so therefore there's less lectins. And if you want to soak your grains or legumes, you put them in a container and you cover them again in a couple of centimeters of water for about 4 to 8 hours. And then when that time's up, you just rinse it thoroughly, again, making sure you're removing all that water. And then you can use a pressure cooker if you're going to eat the beans or even like tomatoes and potatoes or quinoa. And that pressure cooker will break down the lectins. It doesn't break down lectins in wheat, oats, and barley or rye and sprout. So you have to be careful with them. They're not, the pressure cooker is not going to release them. It's also important to note that lectins in peanuts aren't destroyed when you soak or heat them. They're really strong in there. And then also lastly, fermentation, which beneficial bacteria will metabolize many hard to digest compounds, including the lectins. But not all the lectins are completely destroyed, but it does lessen them quite a lot.
Yeah, and I guess like we have so much more access to these kind of fermented foods and sprouting and things like that through health food shops. So if we don't have the time to go through these kind of processes at home, at least we do have those quicker options available to us if we do want to be mindful of our consumption.
Yeah.
And so next one on the list is tannins, which may sound a bit familiar to those of us who do like a glass of wine.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So tannins are a class of chemicals that are found in plants in the family of the polyphenols. So the really common types are resveratrol, so that's like in red grapes and red wine and cocoa. Curcumin from turmeric, anthocyanins that are found in blueberries and other dark berries. And so, these are all actually really good foods for us. So those polyphenols act as antioxidants that can reduce cellular damage and free radical damage in the body. So they're anti-inflammatory, but they're not always good for everybody. And so when you drink or eat tannins, they create that dry astringency in the mouth, almost like a puckering feel that you can get if you drink strong tea or red wine. And like obviously the other anti-nutrients, they are used as protection against predators from the plants and the fungi. So because of this, they also can block the absorption of nutrients. So what the tannins do is they bind to proteins and reduce their digestibility. And they can also block the absorption of iron, specifically the tannins found in tea. So if you enjoy your tea black, which I do, it's best to have it between meals or you add milk to it, because the tannins will bind with the proteins in the milk instead of the proteins in your gut. So it prevents it from interfering with the iron absorption. Also, eating vitamin C rich foods like potatoes or capsicum or oranges before or after you drink tea, or included in a meal with the tannins, will also help to neutralize them. And interestingly, women are more susceptible to low iron than men, mainly because of menstruation, and especially if they're on a vegetarian or a vegan diet. So if you do have low iron, it is something to be aware of, to minimize when you have your tannins. And some people have actual sensitivities to tannin, especially from red wine. And they can get those people that when they have red wine, they get headaches or migraines or that facial flush, or digestive problems. But there can also be mental health disorders, including depression, anxiety, and panic attacks from it as well. So it is actually quite a broad sort of range of symptoms.
Definitely. And it is a common one that we see in our clinics, people reacting to the tannins, especially the red wine headache link that you mentioned. But what are some of the other foods that are high in tannins?
So foods high in tannins, they are tea and coffee, herbs and spices, nuts, fruits, especially grapes, apples, pears, berries, stone fruit. Persimmons are really high, which is a random one. Red wine, beans, and chocolate. So you can reduce tannin concentrations by steeping your tea for a lesser time, or cooking your tannin foods by roasting or slow cooking or pressure cooking or baking, and avoid the peel of citrus fruits, so they can also reduce your tannin exposure. So Earl Grey tea, black's not a good idea.
Yeah, just a quick steep.
Yeah.
Yeah. And moving on to the lucky last one, phytates.
Yeah, so the phytates are also called phytic acid, and it's the stored form of phosphorus that's found in seeds, nuts, legumes, and unprocessed whole grains. So, like once you sprout a seed, the phytate's broken down and the phosphorus is released, and then it's utilized by the young plant. So, when you don't break it down, like when it's not being sprouted, there'll be it's kind of loaded in the seeds or the legumes, and so the amount of phytic acid varies depending on the plant species and then environmental conditions like the climate and the soil quality. It's also used commercially as a preservative because it has antioxidant properties. So it's considered an anti-nutrient because we as humans lack the phytase enzyme that's needed to break it down. So as it passes through our digestive system, it binds to minerals like iron, zinc, and calcium, so they're not well absorbed by the intestine. It also, as well as blocking the absorption of these nutrients, it also inhibits enzymes that we need to digest our food, including pepsin, which is needed to break down proteins in our stomach. Amylase is needed to break down starches into sugars, and trypsin is needed for protein digestive in the small intestine. So this can lead to a host of digestive issues, but then also seemingly unrelated symptoms like headaches, tooth decay, fatigue, rashes. So this blocking of the nutrients, it only happens when the phytic acid is eaten with foods containing these minerals at the same meal. So if your diet is high in foods containing legumes, nuts, seeds, beans, then there's a higher risk of this malnutrition because you're not potentially able to absorb it.
Yeah. Yeah. And how can we reduce the negative impacts of phytates?
So there is natural enzymes called phytases, which are actually present in high phytate foods, but they need to be activated with cooking, soaking, sprouting, and fermented to lessen the phytate content naturally. So cooking phytate-rich foods decrease this phytic acid content. And it just depends on the food, how long it's cooked for, and the level of heat that's used. Specifically, soaking beans and grains for at least 24 hours can decrease this phytate content, but you need to be really careful to throw away that water that's used to be soaked with them and really rinse it through. Canned beans is the same. Like when you open up canned beans, I mean, they've been cooked, so some of those phytates have been removed, but you always that liquid that's in that tin, you need to, like, I usually will tip it out in a sieve and I'll wash it through until you can't see any of the kind of gluggy stuff that's on it. But also including vitamin-rich foods to a meal with the legumes and the whole grains can decrease this phytate. So things like lemon juice or capsicum. And then garlic and onions, if you add that to a meal, they can enhance iron and zinc absorption. So it kind of helps to negate those effects that the phytate might have. And sprouting, again, activates this phytase enzyme that can reduce the phytate concentrations by over 60%. So again, sprouting is a really fantastic way to reduce all these anti-nutrient problems. And also some of your gut bacteria produce enzymes that neutralize the phytates as well.
And phytates actually have some health benefits as well, don't they?
Yeah. So like all the other anti-nutrients that we've talked about, they all have health benefits as well. And so with the phytates, they have a blood glucose lowering effects. So they're beneficial for diabetes and they can potentially help in preventing heart disease. And there's new research on human intestinal cells that show that they might actually potentially act as an antioxidant as well. So it seems that it's the amount of these anti-nutrients that we consume that's a determining factor as to whether they give us the health benefits like being antioxidants or cause the problems of the malabsorption and enzyme disruption. And so the key to safely enjoying them, if you don't have a sensitivity to them, is the preparation. So you need to soak, steam, boil, ferment, use a pressure cooker. Any way that you can reduce these contents will help you improve the absorption of the other beneficial nutrients that are present in these foods. Because the interesting thing is it's estimated that I think it's something like 89% of the population actually has mineral deficiencies. So if you're eating these anti-nutrients, that can exacerbate your nutrient deficiencies and absorption issues. So that can lead to metabolic dysfunction. So it's going back to that whole thing, look after the gut, make sure that that's working correctly, then make sure that you're preparing your foods in the correct way so that you're getting the most out of them.
Yeah, and I guess after all, we need to keep in mind that these anti-nutrients or deemed anti-nutrients are just a component of the food as a whole. So we really need to consider the food as a whole and the benefits and impacts of that food.
Yeah, so if you haven't already noticed, a lot of these foods contain whole grains, beans, and some of the leafy greens. So, beans and many whole grains, they contain soluble fiber, which is something that we call a class as like a prebiotic, and they're essentially food that our gut bacteria will eat or prefers to eat, and so they're really good for our gut. So when our gut digests the soluble fiber, they produce compounds called short chain fatty acids, which can make the colon more acidic. And so the more acidic a colon is, the more that it wards off disease-causing inflammatory bacteria that can cause all this intestinal inflammation. So the short chain fatty acids are really good because they feeds the cells that line your intestinal tract. So this basically promotes a healthier gut lining. And it's all back to the good bacteria in your gut. If you give it a diverse range of different foods, it kind of increases the diversity of the different gut microbiomes in there. And so the more sort of balanced microbiome we have, that's got lots of different species, it reduces our risk of chronic disease. And we're talking about polyphenols, they're really high antioxidant activity, which is really good for us, and they are exclusive in plant-based foods like beans. So although fiber is not considered an essential nutrient, it is a vital nutrient that feeds the good bacteria in our guts, and so we want to make sure that if there's not a sensitivity to it, that if you prepare it properly, then you're going to get the benefits of it. If you're looking after your gut, then the gut wall is going to get stronger, and then this just reduces any inflammation that could be present in the gut.
Yeah. And I guess plant-based foods are essential for our gut health and shouldn't be removed from the diet unnecessarily. So I guess the take-home message, now that you've done a bit of this kind of debunking when it comes to these anti-nutrients and trying to look at these foods as a whole, is yes, you can take that approach if you are particularly sensitive and you're trying to get your health back on track. It may be worthwhile doing these kind of preparation methods, but we also have to try and think that overall we're wanting to consume a high range of foods. Give our gut a good diverse microbiome, because that's going to help us digest these foods in the long run as well. But when it comes to sensitivities and reactions to these kind of substances, that's where we can help with our allergy treatment as well. So, and this is a value that we really hold in all of our clinics to help our clients consume this wide range of foods, because like strict elimination diets, avoiding these foods just aren't realistic long term. So if you do suspect that you are having a reaction or a sensitivity to one or more of these substances, you can get some info through our website to see if this could be a good treatment option for you.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, these reactions to this sort of so-called anti-nutrients can be implicated in various symptoms, things like eczema, asthma, IBS, even brain fog and headaches. So you may not be aware that they actually contributing to your symptom picture. So these are one of the reasons why we like to do these podcasts, is like the more that we can explain different things and different food chemicals and in the body and how they can cause symptoms, the more that people might have this association with, oh, this is me, this happens to me, and therefore everyone gets to learn more about all these different food chemicals that are around.
Yeah.
And so we're all qualified naturopaths who use a form of muscle testing or kinesiology to assess your reactions to various food chemicals like oxalates and lectins. So this is when you come into the clinic. And so we also check a wide range of other food and airborne and chemical substances. So how muscle testing works is that you hold onto a sample vial of the substance, and then we're looking for a change in your muscle strength that indicates a reaction. So if the muscle and your arm stays strong, then that shows that your body's okay with it. But if your muscle weakens, then it indicates a reaction to the substance. So we then use a chiropractic tool called the AccuStim to stimulate the nerve bundles and acupressure points down either side of your spine. And while you're holding on to that sample, we retrain your body to no longer have a negative reaction to the substance.
Yeah, so if any listeners are interested in learning more about positive association technique, I'll pop a link to one of our previous podcast episodes, What is PAT, in the show notes. And you can also visit our website, naturalallergytreatment.com.au, to get more information. Otherwise, thanks for today, Jenny. It's been a really interesting discussion talking about these kind of more controversial kind of anti-nutrients, and I'm sure our listeners will get a lot out of it. So I really look forward to doing the gluten episode next as well.
No worries, Jess. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that one too. Yeah, thanks.
Speak soon.